This is one of those topics I really hate to discuss, something that I thought about simply ignoring. But sadly, the atrocity propaganda being pushed by Israel is being used to justify the massacres that is being perpetrated against the Muslims and the Palestinians of Gaza. Already, many of the claims have been discredited. In fact, Jake's done a video on this channel that have already shown how even Israeli journalists themselves have admitted lies that have been told. Claims about Holocaust survivors killed, 40 beheaded babies strung up on clothesline, Al-Shifa was command and control center for Hamas, attempts to claim Palestinians with white flags weren't murdered. There's just been a huge amount of lies that Israel have so readily expressed to the media and to wider society. However, one claim that's constantly repeated till this day is the claim that Hamas and other Palestinian fighters enacted mass rapes on the 7th of October as part of a strategy of war. And that's really important to note, because the claim isn't just about that rapes and sexual violence occurred, although that is terrible and totally un-Islamic, but it's that mass rapes occurred and that it was a strategy of war, i.e. they were doing this under orders. Now the UN have come out with a report which was broadcasted and headlined across all mainstream media that the UN confirmed rapes and sexual violence were perpetrated by Hamas and other fighters. Therefore, it's crucial to understand what the report actually states beyond simply the headlines, and also note the inherent limited problems of this type of report, something you rarely hear or understand if you just consume information from mainstream media. Look, I want to make it absolutely clear, I'm not claiming there were no rapes or acts of sexual violence. I don't know. The only information I have access to is from those making this claim, which is primarily Israel, who are also known to be liars. Also, let's be clear, such acts are absolutely disgusting, but is the UN report reliable information to confirm not only rapes occurred, but it was also a strategy of war? Let's begin by saying that the report actually exposed some of the lies that have been peddled by Israel, and I'll explain that later. The report itself places a host of caveats, not least of which is that it wasn't an investigative report.
I must stress that my mission was neither intended nor mandated to be investigative in nature. This is a mandate vested in other UN bodies.
It also relied on one side of its information, and it was a survivor victim-centered report. That means the assumption would be to believe the victims as a default. In fact, the head of this report stated, "This is not an investigation. We are not talking about evidence that would stand up in a court of law."
Yourself. I mean, like, we're not talking evidence will stand in a court of law. We did not collect. We are not the custodian of any material from this. And your question is about the raw footage or the photos. We did not. So we have nothing. We have nothing except for this report to pass on. It's a public report.
So let me read what the report actually states. In Israel, the mission team conducted a total of 33 meetings with Israeli national institutions, including relevant line ministries such as the Foreign Affairs, Welfare and Social Affairs, Health and Justice, including the State Attorney General's Office, as well as the Israeli Defense Forces, the Israeli Security Agency Shin Bet, the Israeli National Police in charge of investigation into the 7th of October attacks, also met with the President of Israel, Isaac Herzog, and the First Lady. So very clearly, this is a report backed by one side. And let's remind ourselves that Israel has been judged as committing a plausible genocide and has lied on numerous occasions. It's in their favor to push the atrocity and claims of mass rape. The report mentions a number of challenges it faced. These are like the caveats, and this is what it says. Further, a significant number of the recovered bodies had suffered destructive burn damage, which made the identification of potential crimes of sexual violence impossible. The main challenge was limited number of access of survivors / victims of sexual violence and to survivors and witnesses of the 7th of October attacks. While the mission team was able to meet with some released hostages as well as some survivors and witnesses of the attacks, it did not meet with any survivor victim of sexual violence from the 7th of October, despite concerted efforts encouraging them to come forward. The absence of comprehensive forensic evidence limited the mission team's ability to draw definitive forensic conclusions in many instances. Note, the UN didn't interview any of the survivors of rape or sexual violence. Not one. It mainly comes from two sources. Firstly, certain witnesses, and secondly, circumstantial video or photo evidence. One of those witnesses that were met was Yoshi Landau, the head of operations of the Southern Israel region of Religious Disaster Victim Identification Organization called Zaka, has made many unsubstantiated claims. He claimed previous that Hamas militants viciously mutilated and killed a 6 and 8-year-old child and their parents in a kibbutz biri before dining in their home. He also was the source of the claim that a fetus was cut out of a pregnant woman and then stabbed and killed. Both stories are seen as fake and unfounded, and there's a number of other false unfounded stories of atrocities that Zaka have propagandized, and yet this organization is at the center of campaigning to inform the world of Hamas's rapes. Now, this doesn't throw into question that every second-hand witness account doesn't matter or is untrue, but it doesn't add weight either that you're using these types of individuals and these types of organizations which have lied. Remember again, these are not the survivors of the attack. These are not the people who were raped or sexually abused, which Israel have not allowed the United Nations to interview, but what others have claimed. Second-hand accounts. Some of those are known lies, as I've said, like Zaka. As for the second main source, which is the video footage or the camera footage, there is no videos or photos of any rapes or sexual violence. Now that seems strange because I'm pretty sure people like Piers Morgan claimed that this was all recorded by Hamas on their GoPros.
They literally broadcast it on their own streaming platforms.
But yet, with all of the photos and videos handed to the United Nations, not one depicts any of this occurring. What the photos and videos do, however, suggest is circumstantial evidence, such as half-naked women, some from the waist down, who had their hands tied. And based on this, the UN concluded that conflict-related sexual violence likely happened.
That's why in the report we take the stand that this is circumstantial, because you see a photo of a woman naked. It does not convey rape, but it is circumstantial. It is circumstantial indicators.
Now, could they, IDF, have tampered with the bodies to make it appear so? That wasn't under investigation. It was just taken prima facie, from face value. Furthermore, the report had no access to any of the forensic evidence. In fact, there wasn't any forensic evidence for them to judge.
So there was very little. There was very little forensic evidence
whether rape or sexual violence occurred. Now that obviously could be for a variety of reasons, but why am I looking into this with this certain degree of potential skepticism? Because what Israel wants to do is weaponize this report to justify the ongoing massacres.
Are you at all concerned that this report, sexual violence against women, this is being weaponized as a way to continue violence in Gaza?
And if the report is saying it confirms or is likely that rape occurred, then it's only honest and proper to look at what the report relied upon and what it didn't to come to a particular conclusion. And so it didn't use the testimony of survivors. It didn't use any forensic evidence. There was no video or photo evidence directly showing rape or sexual violence. But it relied upon was primarily hand-picked witnesses, hand-picked by the Israeli state, some of whom have been discredited, who then gave second-hand information. We also know that claims the IDF have made and the so-called investigative reporting by the New York Times titled "Screams Without Words: How Hamas Weaponized Sexual Violence on October the 7th, how these have actually been contradicted by family members of the victims. Some of those victims that were claimed to be raped were named in the article. Their own family members came out and said no, they weren't raped or sexually abused. One of the spokespersons said, "You're talking about the Sharabi girls," she said. "No, they were shot. I'm saying just, but they were shot and were not subjected to sexual abuse." So the claims that New York Times are making contradicted the family members and residents of the kibbutz itself. But yet, New York Times still stands by this report. They said, "We stand by the story and are continuing to report on the issue of sexual violence of October 7th. Interestingly, Elon Levi, yes, that Elon Levi, he played a lead role in connecting the anonymous paramedics who were used as sources for these claims in Kibbutz Biri with international outlets like the New York Times. Now look, Going back to the report, it makes certain conclusions. Firstly, that at least in 3 areas, they believe conflict-related sexual violence occurred, and that they believe in some hostages they were sexually abused. However, and this is key, the mission was neither intended to, and nor could the mission team in such a short period of time establish the prevalence of conflict-related sexual violence during and after the October 7th attack. The overall magnitude, scope, and specific attribution of these violations would require a comprehensive investigation by competent bodies. Why is this key? Because the central accusation of Israel is that Hamas and other fighters were engaged in mass rapes as a strategy of war. Yet what the United Nations is saying is that this cannot be confirmed by their report. So indeed, one rape, I want to make it clear, one rape is horrific. And again, I'm not trying to downplay this, but the claim that this was a strategy of war, Hamas fighters and other fighters were following orders, that claim is unproven. That's just simply a point that the IDF keep repeating as a way to justify the ongoing massacres that we're seeing taking place in Gaza. And it seems very strange that there would be these mass rapes for 3 reasons. Firstly, Hamas, whatever you think of them, however you perceive them, they themselves see themselves as devout Muslims and so believe rape and zina are capital punishment crimes. So to think that they would undertake these types of acts seems highly dubious. Secondly, in such a dynamic situation where they are engaged in conflict with IDF troops, with helicopter gunships, tanks and infantry, do you think that they would take time out to engage in mass rapes? This seems a little bit incredulous. Maybe isolated incidents may have occurred, but systemic actions of rape doesn't seem to be plausible in such a dynamic conflict situation. Thirdly, we have interviews of hostages or those involved, those survivors of the 7th of October attack, who spoke about how they weren't mistreated, the complete opposite, in fact.
Did you meet with those Israeli released hostages who spoke in public how they were respected, how they were treated? One of them said they protected us with their bodies.
הם נכנסים ואני אומרת להם, יש לי פה 2 ילדים. הדבר הראשון שאני אומרת להם, בעברית? לא, באנגלית. הם מסתכלים ואז אחד אומר לי באנגלית, אל תדאגי, אני מוסלמי, אנחנו לא נפגע בכם.
So this doesn't seem to fit the pattern of a systemic strategy of war to engage in mass rapes and sexual abuse. The report also states the mission team conducted a visit to Kibbutz Be'eri and was able to determine that at least 2 allegations of sexual violence widely repeated in the media were unfounded due to either new superseding information or inconsistency in the facts gathered. These included highly publicized allegations of pregnant woman whose womb had reportedly been ripped open before being killed, with her fetus stabbed while still inside her. Other allegations including of objects intentionally inserted into female genital organs could not be verified by the mission, due in part to limited and low quality imagery. So here again, there's a contradiction of the official claims that have been made by the IDF and repeated by mainstream media and politicians. Where does this leave the report? It seems like the United Nations has come under a lot of fire from Israel, and in producing this report, they want to be seen as being balanced. But being perceived as balanced has resulted in producing a shoddy report that, in the words of Pramila Patten, would not stand up in a court of law.